Well, media personality Shashi Naidoo has been slapped with a 10-year ban from Israel. She had tried to enter the West Bank while on a mission to educate herself about Israel's occupation of Palestine. The ban has drawn wide condemnation, with some calling for a trade and diplomatic ban on Tel Aviv. Naidoo is back in the country and joins us now in studio to give us the lowdown on her ordeal. Good morning to you, Shashi. Thank you very much for joining us here on Afro Worldview.
Thank you for having me.
Well, as a start, so I think most of our viewers are at this point sort of have an understanding as to why and how we got here. You expressed views which were, received mostly as pro-Israel, and of course what you said about Gaza. Let me just maybe ask you at this point, in fact, looking back, and I suppose retrospect is always the best teacher, experience being the best teacher, what do you think now of those views that you made as you sit here today?
Gosh, so, I did clear that up at the press conference that I initially had, that, I'd said what I'd said because someone was attacking someone a picture that I'd posted on Instagram.
Black Coffee.
Yes,
DJ,
Black Coffee.
Yeah.
I try not to mention his name, but I don't want to drag anyone else into this.
All right.
But and someone had said quite ugly things, and I was like, I'm sure. And also, having most of my friends are Jewish, all my boyfriends have been Jewish. I was currently dating a Jew at the time, so you kind of you see one perspective. And I said, I know there are two sides to the story, but I don't think I have a political understanding that's good enough to give an educated response, but I do want to protect my friend. So I then asked someone to help me draft a response. I was in Ibiza at the time, partying it up. I literally read the first 3 lines and then copy, paste, post. And after reading it, I only read the full thing fully after reading it. And even then, I was kind of like, oh, yeah, this is very harsh. I would never have said it's something harsh. But I still didn't. I thought everything must have been factual because my friend would never have sent me something that was not factual. So getting the backlash that I received, I almost feel some of it was necessary. The death threats and the other things I could have done without. That was quite traumatic. But I think people needed to react to what I was saying in order for me to understand that, listen, when everyone is telling you that you are wrong, you need to look. You need to open your eyes and say, okay, well, let me do more research on the matter. And I vowed to do that. And I think there was no better way for me to do that than actually go to Palestine. Yeah. That didn't happen, but in the time that I was there, I was able to go to Jordan. Jordan has the biggest population of Palestinians outside of Palestine, so there are refugee camps there, millions of people who've been displaced. So seeing what I saw in those refugee camps was quite a bit and a lot, and then getting more of the research. And then there was also a South African team that we went with. There were 3 journalists, and we'd made a decision to split ourselves. So there was one would go in after an hour. They pretended to be a couple. No one went in the guise of being journalists because you're not allowed in. And that in itself, for me, said a lot, that we had to be so sneaky and conniving to get into Palestine.
Yeah.
Because
I'll get to that. There's 2 other issues that you've raised here that I just want to touch on. I'll get to the refugee camps and what you got out of being, sort of told that you can't get into Palestine. But, one of the things you touched on was the backlash.
Yes.
And, it's always interesting to me when there's sort of, Twitter or whatever, the media sort of backlash that you get. And I've been at the raw end of it myself, so I fully understand it. But my question to you is, do you feel that if you'd not suffered that media backlash, had people not come after you and the death threats, and that's obviously terrible, but, without all of that, do you think that you would have been sitting in the position where you are now, that you regret, if you'd had a couple of friends sort of say to you, listen, that wasn't cool, what you said, and this is actually what the situation is, would you have gone all the way that you've gone out of your way the way that you have? Because some people have said, and I'm sure you've seen the comments, some people have said, yeah, well, it's because she's lost some money, so, this is why she's suddenly so apologetic about it. Yeah.
There's 2 different sides to that. One is obviously the backlash was dramatic. Just on the post of me apologizing, I 5,000 comments until I deactivated, and because people were using it as a platform to fight amongst each other. So my backlash was very dramatic and drastic, and that's why I took drastic steps. You know, and I was in the midst of all of this, and I said, okay, I need to see. I think if it had been a few friends that had just said to me, look, this is actually what's going on, I definitely would have been open to hearing. I'm not someone who's closed-minded and, oh, I don't want to hear. So I would have definitely listened, and if anyone had other viewpoints to share with me, I would have wanted to hear. You know, in the same light of me saying, well, there are always two sides to the story, you know. And I don't approve still to this day. You know, I mentioned that I don't want to be radicalized on either side of this argument. And someone came up to me, and I was asked at both press conferences, what do you mean when you say you don't want to be radicalized? Because surely what is happening is wrong, and by saying you don't want to be radicalized, doesn't that mean you don't, you know, understand the plight of the Palestinian people?
And your view now
but I
is?
feel that I still don't want to be used as a tool of propaganda.
Right.
I feel that is wrong. I don't want to be seen as someone who's anti-Semitic. That is certainly not the case at all. So I don't feel that, and people who go on either extreme can, you know, and the name calling, and that, I don't think that is going to, you're not going to achieve anything through that. You know, I think if you've seen my recent posts, they've all been about love, reconciliation, trying to see the light in this, and how do you get to a place when you can come to the table, have an open dialogue with love?
Yeah. So, okay, what was the plan? I mean, you left on what you said would be this educational trip or fact-finding mission to Palestine and Israel. Firstly, take us through, you know, what happened when you were blocked from entering. And secondly, what does that now say to you? And I think you were sort of touching on that. My thinking, you know, if that were me, would have been, if there's nothing, you know, to hide, why would you be blocking me? You'd be giving me a safe passage to enter. You've called the Israeli interrogation mental warfare. I hope I'm quoting you correctly.
Yes, absolutely.
So, you know, what are your thoughts, you know, now as you were blocked, this 10-year ban, all of that? What are you thinking?
I have so many thoughts on it. You know, so the initial plan was to go to Jordan. We did visit the refugee camps there, as I mentioned, and then we were going to go into Palestine, into the West Bank. No one's allowed into Gaza. You know, everyone says Gaza's free, Israel's withdrawn, but that's not the case. Nobody can get in and out. So a place that is free, how can you call it free when nobody is allowed access in or out? So I would never have been able to go to Gaza in the first place. So we wanted to go into the West Bank and see what was happening there, perhaps see some of the occupation, because that is actually viewed as illegal. So my process of going, I was actually trying to get into the West Bank, so that is still Palestine, and I was interrogated for 2 hours. It initially started off not so bad, they were a little bit friendly, but the interrogation got very, very aggressive, shouting, calling me a liar, and you know, I've got when under that pressure, I mean, I was just crying, and then they said to me, you're not being allowed in, you're a liar, and you're supporting BDS. You're here for a BDS conference, which was absolutely not true. So I'd obviously been flagged at some point before, but I mean, the craziness of not being allowed into one country by another country. You know, imagine if Zimbabwe was blocking access to South Africa. You know, it doesn't make any sense that another country is controlling another country's borders. But that in itself, the bad experience, but with the journalists that I went with that are now in the West Bank, the guy called me almost in tears. And this is a veteran journalist. He's covered, as a black man, Eugene Branch's funeral. He's covered Fees Must Fall. He's seen some really violent political things, but he was almost in tears, and he said, I'm so glad you're not here. They were being escorted around by an Israeli soldier, ex-Israeli soldier, who started an organization called Breaking the Silence, about people in the Israeli Defense Force who are now questioning the morality of what they were made to do. They were in Hebron, which used to be quite a bustling city, and that city has been systematically shut down. People kicked out of their houses, the doors sealed, life made virtually impossible. And as they were taking this guy around, they were sitting at a little curio shop. Interesting to note is there was a mosque and a synagogue right there together, and there's a wall blocking the two. Muslims aren't allowed to walk on that road. Anyway, so they were sitting there, and just up the road is a couple of hundred settlers that have settled there, Israeli settlers, into the West Bank. One of the settlers walks up to him. He's got this massive black dog on a leash, and he proceeds to beat Yehuda up. This is the guy that was taking them around. blood pouring down his face, glasses broken. We actually have images of all of this. We managed to capture it. And all the while Israeli soldiers are standing there doing nothing to protect this Israeli man. But it kind of shows you the tension there is for any settler or Israeli person within that region kind of being sympathetic to the viewpoints of the Palestinian people. So, and all the while, there's still gunshots in the distance and explosions. So it's crazy what is happening there. And, you know, initially when I'd gotten back, I thought, I'm not actually going to take TV interviews. I kind of want my life to go back to normal. I've done what I said I'd do. I'd educate myself. I've been to the camps. I've done that. Enough. But after hearing that, after seeing what I've seen, I had a few sleepless nights, and I thought, no, it kind of is my moral obligation to speak about what I've seen. Me getting blocked. You don't do that if you have nothing to hide. I'm sorry.
And I mean, I want to go back to that. You know, how do you feel about this 10-year ban that's been imposed on you? Would you have, in any case, been trying to go there anyway?
You know, funny enough, ironically, I was meant to move to Israel in January to Magai, which means an Orthodox conversion to Judaism. That was my plan. So it's ironic that all of this has happened, but I feel, you know, it just reeks of what was happening in the apartheid era, where people were not allowed in. People who had a differing viewpoint from the apartheid government at that time were not allowed in unless you were taken on trips where you saw how happy black people were living here and how great it was, you know, but as long as you only saw the tiny little bits that you wanted to see. Because what's come back is they said, no, you're welcome to come back to Israel. No one's told me this. People have just spoken it, you know, said in articles. No, so she's welcome to come back, but in a trip that we plan. And I'm sorry, that's not how it works. That's not how a democratic country works, where you can't go where you want, see what you want, because then you're hiding things.
Now, what's your relationship now with organizations like BDS? I mean, they've spoken, we've had them in the studio here quite a few times, and they've, you know, spoken in support of you. I mean, you say you don't want to be used as some sort of a propaganda tool. So how do you respond to, you know, I read an article saying that you've, an opinion piece, that said that you've become some sort of a political football for the South African Council of Churches and the South African Friends of Israel. How would you respond to something like that?
So I feel I see no problem in being associated with the South African Council of Churches. They represent 1 million people, South African Jews for Palestinians. You know, like I feel that, and specifically with BDS, what I've seen happening very, very openly is that anyone who disagrees with what Israel is saying or their agenda is labeled a terrorist. I myself was labelled a terrorist in pursuit of knowledge and just wanting to go and see what was happening. I was labelled a terrorist and not allowed to go in for 10 years. So the same has been done with BDS, but you know, I think people kind of are not very clued up in what BDS does. Well, I wasn't, absolutely. It stands for boycott, divestment, sanctions. So basically, if you don't approve of what Israel is doing, do not spend your money with them. Do not support Israeli products, because through money and their lack of money, they will understand that it will put pressure on them to stop what they're doing. So it's not forcing anyone to do anything, but I kind of think sanctions in the 1980s worked in South Africa. But what, you know, and you call it terrorism, but terrorism is acts of violence, especially against civilians, to get political gain. I can't think of a more non-violent way to protest against something that clearly is very wrong. So,
as a South African, and I mean, there's no doubt you know the history that we come from,
absolutely,
having suffered apartheid. Were you someone who was ever sort of outspoken about the past? Were you someone who necessarily even cared about, you know, the past that we come from? And how has this experience, in a sense, brought you sort of to understand what was going on in our very own country in a way? I mean, I heard you now using the term apartheid, which is in the South African context, but is it something that you'd really cared about in the past, or has this sort of brought your attention to what had been going on in South Africa in the first place?
Well, I'm 37, so I was affected by apartheid. I'm actually 38. I was affected by apartheid. I only got to attend a Model C school in grade 7. Yes, I'm like getting confused. It was standard 5 back in my day. But, you know, and there were only 2 non-white students accepted at that time, 2 Indian girls that were allowed into this previously only white school. I wasn't allowed to go to the beach. I was affected in apartheid. I remember going to many marches with my parents. I remember my dad always having me on his shoulders and walking. So yes, I understand the struggle. I, at that time, didn't understand the similarity of our struggle with the similarity of the Palestinian people. I in no way understood something called an Israeli apartheid. I had no understanding of the two being similar. So yes, my parents were heavily and actively involved in the struggle. I myself was affected, but I didn't correlate or understand the similarities between the two. Now
so
I do.
Where do you stand now? I mean, I found it very interesting that you said that you were, on the verge of converting to Judaism, and even mentioned that most of your boyfriends had been.
Yes, my ex-husband was Jewish. Like all my boyfriends.
So,
I was called a Hindu. Oh, because I'm Hindu.
So where do you stand now? I mean, even the friend who gave you that response that got you into this hot water, did you say, you're not a friend, look what happened?
Well, it's the minute I apologized, that friend unfollowed me on Instagram. So obviously not a very close friend. Where do I stand now? A lot of people on Twitter, because obviously, what people don't understand is like, oh, I'm just trying to protect my image and I want people to like me. That is certainly not the case, because if people would go through my DMs and see what's being posted about me on Twitter, I'm being called anti-Semitic, I'm being called a stupid idiot, I'm being called every name conceivable under the sun, but just now by the other side. And I was well aware of that happening before I came back and before my decision to speak out. That is why also part of the reason why I thought, let me just not say anything, let me just keep quiet. But then, they say that if you are not speaking out and you know of the oppression, you're just as bad as the oppressor. So I feel that a moral duty to speak out. That doesn't make me anti-Semitic, not at all. I still love all my Jewish friends dearly. I just think it makes me someone who doesn't want to see the suffering of people. And what confuses me most is I don't understand how someone can say my suffering is more important than your suffering. At the end of the day, we're all human beings, and all we want is love, to be loved, to love. And unfortunately, there are millions of Palestinian people that have been suffered and are not able to experience, to go to their homeland, and that's suffering.
Now, you said that, you thought you'd rather just keep quiet. And, I suppose just by this interview, you've shown that you won't actually keep quiet. And I must tell you, I'm guilty of having said on Twitter to you, maybe you should keep quiet. So moving forward, will you be more vocal? Will you be talking? Will you be holding talks? I mean, I just want to know where exactly you're taking this now.
I still to this day I'm not sleeping properly. I wake up and then I still have maybe I should just deactivate the Twitter commentary and the direct messages, because it does affect you. But at the end of the day, I feel that I've made the effort of researching, knowing and understanding the situation. It is so multifaceted and so complex that I'm really just starting my journey to understanding completely. But if I look at where I was a month ago and my understanding of the situation there, it is vastly, vastly different. And like I said, I'll use the word again, a moral obligation to speak. Many people are saying, oh, you're just a face, you're a dumb model, shut up. And they've used much stronger language than you did. But I feel that I need to use my voice. And if one thing I've realized, you can take away endorsements, you can take away whatever you like, but you cannot take away my voice.
Yeah, I think I like that. Look, Shashi, I think most people make mistakes. We all do. We've all had the backlash on Twitter, and I think from this experience, perhaps it's it's your opportunity to sort of make right or make amends from it. And I think that is what you're doing, and that's admirable. Thank you for joining us here on Afro Breakfast. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
All right.